saw a lot of, sorry, I saw a lot of characters, recognized a lot of characters in my life coming from the realm of Diva and Titans and,
Well, that was from the yesterday's workshop.
Workshop.
Yeah.
You weren't asking about the workshop.
Well, no, that's fine. I was asking generally about yesterday's course as well, but say more about that.
And a bit from some realms in myself also. So it's like I don't want to own up to it, but I think there is a bit of that also.
I guess the some of those realms are about entitlement and a whole bunch of other things that we can feel really.
More than that, I felt that the concept of acceptance of middle age and resistance to it in our society, which is growing, which I have experienced myself personally also, is it's very present. It's something that I have also struggled with at times. I was confused. I'm clear now. There's acceptance of that, but there are moments when I go back and into that wanting to be that person who can hold on to her youth and that energy and that. So it's very interesting for me.
That's my work at work. That's why
I thought of you actually.
No, it's also making them understand how to accept it naturally if they wish to. There are obviously choices that takes them away from their natural growth, and then how natural progress into further years can be made much more natural than in other situations without looking different. And that kind of resonated. But coming back to the research, like Anita and Zaran were also saying, there's so much interest in research, because that is something that not everybody knows about. Obviously there is research happening at the universities and so on and so forth. We are not aware of it. But then personal research and personal reflection and research of that and the learning that will come from the research of how we are going to take our practice forward. That's a very personal kind of qualitative research that will be undertaken. So quite exciting.
I'm really glad. I always get really excited when people get excited about their work and wanting to write about it, wanting to share good practice. That feels to me to be really good practice-based research, where the work that we do matters. And I have a really strong feeling about the work that you're doing here in Pakistan, with its special, with its own special qualities and insights that you gain, from working in a different cultural environment. I'm always mindful, for example, when I come from the UK, that we're kind of presenting a model that works within that kind of European, American, North American traditional cultural way of life, and actually it really endangers a lot of the exquisite work that happens here. It's a bit like, do you remember all those years ago when I came and we were looking at unconditional presence and relational depth, and you told me about Terao, and and it was like, well, you've already got a model here to work with. Why take this Western idea and erase something of your own work? And I can see that on many different levels. I can see how, a number of ethical things don't take fully into account how things are here. So I think that you have a lot of, a lot of opportunities, I think, for publishing your work in some way. And I kind of hope, with the, with this element of the research bit, that you will take time to write about your work, whether that's to be shared with each other, or indeed even more widely. I don't know how that sounds to you, but it feels like you have an opportunity to describe, the uniqueness of the work that maybe you're engaged with here.
There's a new, I think the new generation that is now in Pakistan, who returned from maybe their studies abroad. Our generation went after graduation, so we went at about early 21, 22, and so we were already professionals when we went out to do our post-graduation, so very firm with our values and beliefs and so on. And that was appreciated there because it was something new out there, home drink and other values that we have. And then came the generation who left soon after O-levels and A-levels. Now that is another group of people who have returned, and they're very, they have their values and their morals, but there's a lot of shadowing of what we saw there and the peer pressures and other things that they have to do in a university to survive there. And especially being foreigners and from this part of the world, I think they have to be more loyal to that system than the locals themselves. And so when they return, they have their own issues. And that is another group of people who need to be understood by the senior generation. And they have their own language, they have their own way of life, which is very different to the joint family systems that we have seen in our generation, which is slowly coming to single units. And what counselors are doing now, our elders used to do, because there was this whole family system, you sat there, you spoke about it, and there was a certain amount of wisdom in the elders. And the elders now are little children themselves, running around trying to be young and not accepting their years and not wanting to be their age. So it's a total shift in the society, which is really a huge board for research.
It's interesting that you said that. Yes, there is. But I went when I was 18, right after high school I went. So there were a lot of people I know who went at that time.
So you're that generation.
But I don't know if that, I find that a lot of my children's generation who are in their early 20s now, some of them have not gone abroad, and I don't think you need to shift. I think because of the internet and everything, a lot of that just comes. I know a lot of kids who never studied abroad, but you would think that they've never lived here.
Because they have to get into that group, and then they have to, that peer pressures and the peer behavior, without really understanding. Suddenly they're in it and they're doing things knowingly or unknowingly. I think that could be a research, but they're sort of suddenly into a pattern which is not what they have at home.
But there is a conflict. But there's a conflict that sits that I've seen in therapy also. Something you just shared actually really homes with me, because initially when I started coming here to study, so outside people had this talk about when people go to therapy, suddenly they get this liberated feeling and they become angry and divorces happen and all that stuff. Just talk about that. So what you're saying is, I think it's very, very important, because what happens in our therapy rooms, we do bring our values into it. But because all this education about psychotherapy that we're getting is very Western. So what do? Is we compartmentalize. We go to the academic part, and as therapists sit with that, thinking our values don't have a role. So when we say that to our client sitting there, who has a lot of emotions and turmoil happening, and there's this kind of a Western concept that's given, because we have not even processed it here,
yeah,
how we want to give it to them.
yeah,
There is conflict again, because here we're telling them you are important, you can be your own person, how to make boundaries, say no, all these things. So their thing is conflicted because innate feeling here is to coexist. It's a very innate feeling to coexist. Okay, fine, I can fight with this person, tell this person off, then what?
yeah,
I've never been trained to be independent.
yes.
Now what do we do with this independence that you've taught us? You know, because they don't know how to deal with it. So there is something to think about when we're sitting there, to maybe have a little process about before we say this, add on our values into it and then communicate it.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting concept because like even like sometimes when I'm sitting around and just having conversation again with like my grandparents or whatever, there's a lot of like overlap with the stuff that we're taught,
Yeah.
right? Like, but in completely different language or in a different way or looking at it at a different angle. And it would be also interesting to see where it overlaps also, right? Like, so like you said, the terao, like, okay, words
Yeah.
like this already exist, but like also a comparison of, okay, so over here in this theory, it's like this, but a very similar thing is in the Eastern culture where this is referred to as this, like when we're looking at poetry or literature even.
Yes.
That would be interesting.
That's what I'm saying. So somewhere we have to sort of realize that there is a mixing of that before
Yeah.
we have separated roles somewhere. So as a therapist, I think you're right. There's a lot of rich work, and I feel that when we have our groups together, that we are sort of figuring that out. That there is this, and this terao is a word I use that in my at my home because my mother used to use this word a lot. That after 40, terao is the word, and even in religion it keeps saying that 40 is a landmark of your age. Where you actually have a sense of where you're going, what you want, and you're comfortable with yourself. So like a very liberated feeling. It's mentioned many times. And it is true, the terao, that of not wanting to have this presenting self anymore, that's the thing of teenagers, and this confusion, you're figuring out what you are all about and settling in with that. But there is an unsettling that's happening, and I'm sure there's globalization, like you're saying,
Yeah.
everything is available to everybody, mixed messages, so there is something happening in the society overall also, that shift that's happening.
Well, they keep saying now the 30s is the new 40s and stuff like that, and then all the cartoons on it, and yeah. So there is, but you see also on our part compared to the Western, when they're 18, they go off to college or they go start living on their own, so there's some kind of delay. Here there's, they don't, they always live at home. So a lot of simple things like buying simple food stuff and all is also something they've never experienced. And then all of a sudden we're like, trying to make them such an, individual kind of person. But these basics are not even instilled.
One of the things that if we just kind of try and just hold what we're talking about here is, and from a research perspective, one of the things that would be really exciting to do is to find a way of capturing this experience, okay, which is what we try to do in qualitative research, is capture the experience, because what you're describing and what Shaista brought in there is this phenomena. There is this thing that we have here. You're all describing it, there's that lovely description of like what it's like when you're at Therapy Works, let's say, for example, and you're suddenly you're deposited with all of this sort of Western stuff, and yet you also have a hand into this stuff.
Yes.
And there's that space where like, wow, how do I work with this? How does that impact on me? And for me, when you're speaking, I get really excited and curious there. Because there's, wow, I really want to hear, the essence of that, because that feels like something really important to communicate. Do you get that? Otherwise, we don't hear it. It doesn't get presented. We we can't comment on it, or it can't add to deeper conversations with others, yeah? And for me, this is one of the exciting aspects of doing research, not in the X sum is greater than, but from a qualitative research perspective where we're able to gather the stories, whether that's the stories from our therapy room that we can share with others if there's good practice in there, or practice that was kind of like, you know, like filled with all kinds of, in inverted commas, errors. Yeah? We only begin to know about these things when research gets published, and often through case studies or through a practitioner taking a topic and writing about it. Are you familiar with Yalom's work? Yeah. Yeah. Which everybody really likes Yalom's work. Why? He's written several books. Love's Executioner was one. The Gift of Therapy. But essentially what Yalom does is he just talks about his work, isn't it? It's a bit like you become a fly on the wall in his descriptions of what happens with clients. And it's really exciting reading. Yeah.
Well, that's something to historical review of the way the evolution has occurred in our society. Basically British India.
Yeah.
At that time, families, especially, I can speak from my own historical review because the families, mothers and fathers' sides, they were all educated and they had British nannies and so on and so forth, and then became bars at law in those days and brought in the constitution, Yaya Bhaktiyar, and it was my mother's side and Deopandis on the other side. And the girls were all educated with masters, etc. way back in the 1930s and 20s. And then across the board there was this sort of families who were highly educated, and yet the values of our cultural setup were very much embedded and acknowledged. And the religion as we see it today did not exist that way. It was very much practical from the Holy Book, but it was very integrated with the modern teachings, etc. And then came this breed of the fashion pop culture, and suddenly, the impression that there's no education in Pakistan, for me it is a shock when I hear that, because it is not true. But it is a partial reality now, and the educated are kind of marginalized, and they are all present there, but it has been there, it is there. But then this confused generations that have come in, that is where the issues have become more and more evident. And also the fact that the joint family systems and their values have also become confused. They don't know what is right and what is wrong. So they're aping something that is not understood. And in my practice, at least that with that historical, material that circulates in my system and my mind, that is something that's always there with me. So I don't know, I think that is something that we could all sort of talk about and bring out, and what is the perception of.
Absolutely. It sounds to me like one of the things that, the kind of research that I'm talking about, so, which is like how we describe from our own experience, what we describe from our own experience, and the way in which that can contribute to the wider community, whether that's the academy, or in general. And for me, part of research is about looking at ways of doing that. We get so caught up with the Western medical model in terms of what is relevant research, that we miss an opportunity to really get close to people's stories and indeed to people's day-to-day work, which ultimately is the most interesting in some ways. is. And that's essentially what we're focusing on. I'll be showing some PowerPoints of, of the historic kind of journey of this kind of research, which is a very legitimate form of research, in the West anyway, from a qualitative perspective. But in terms of research, there are many different models that we can use, and already you're kind of describing some interesting bits of research. What we're beginning to look at is, in many ways, Yalom actually offers his work is sort of is very much comes from a school, if you like, of autoethnography, which essentially is a method of research where we it's a bit like an autobiography, Or when you do ethnographic research is often favoured by anthropologists who essentially kind of go into an environment, they kind of plop themselves in there. So I would come in, like I'm an outsider coming in, I'd embed myself into your group, and I'd be, kind of engaged with you, and I'd be writing about it, because I'd be talking with you, and, I'd slowly build up an understanding of what life is like in a Therapy Works group, by being part of it. So I'd be able to then write about it, and in my writing about it, as an anthropologist, I would be able to kind of send that out to a much wider audience. That's how, we kind of hear stories, don't we, from anthropologists, about what it's like to be in a particular society. Some medical anthropologists will situate themselves within medical scenarios, and describe it. So we then get an understanding of how different cultural groups or different work groups kind of operate. So sometimes when you read some really great work, like people like Jane Goodall, are you familiar with Jane Goodall? Okay, as an anthropologist, like she's changed the world partly by her work, sort of working out in the field, we come to hear other people's stories, and we learn a lot from that. Autoethnographic work is essentially where I write about my experience. In order to give you a sense of what, what that experience was like, but also a little bit like why I am like I am. And I'm going to read you a very, very powerful autoethnographic piece in a moment from a colleague of mine, who, I'll read it because I think that will give you a sense of what autoethnographic writing is like. This is written by a man called Richard Peacock. He was a colleague of mine at Bournemouth, and Richard was somebody who worked for a patient advocate group in Dorset in the UK. And his work, he suffered tremendous post-traumatic stress. He was a soldier in the war, which led to massive anxiety, and meant that he couldn't function very well. So he was part of a mental health advocate group, and has done great work there. But part of his difficulty was kind of managing his anxiety and post-traumatic stress. But in order to understand how he comes here, he writes, his doctorate was an autoethnographic piece. And I want you to listen to it because it also will give us a sense of another way of doing research. Yeah. Traditional research tends to be, I go out and I find something, I write it up, often in quite academic jargon. I kind of put it in a journal, and probably not many people read it. There are a load of PhDs in universities where nobody's read. Yeah. But with some forms of research, and in particular the research that I'm inviting you to engage in, is the kind of research where we think about several things. And here's the thought. What is good research? And according to some people, research is good when several aspects are met. Okay? And the first thing is that as a researcher, if when I do the research, I'm changed as a result of it. 2, if I'm changed as a result of doing it, yeah, or if those that I'm working with are changed as a result of it. The third thing is to think about how I communicate my research. How I communicate my research, so that those who receive my research are changed as a result of it. And a fourth thing that often people say.
I missed the third one.
Sorry?
I missed the third one.
No, well that was, we think about how we communicate it so that the people who receive our research are changed by it. And fourthly, that that kind of compassionate action arises as a result of our research. I'll be giving you a selection of books that I think are quite helpful, but essentially I'll be praising a lot of this work for you. But can you see, and that is called transformational research. Yeah. So this isn't the research that sits in a dusty paper somewhere, but we think very carefully about how we communicate our research. Yeah. So I'm changed, those who are engaged with me changed, those who read it are changed, and good compassionate action arises, or good transformation arises as a result of it. But for so many pieces of research, nothing happens. Yeah. If I was to ask you, what research of late has particularly impacted on you? I suspect there are not that many papers that change you.
Talking about Yuvraj Hariri's book, it's a lot on the TV and on different social. Have you heard of it?
Who's that?
Yuvraj Hariri, his book on the evolution of mankind, Sapiens.
Oh yes, Sapiens. Sapiens is yeah. Well, there you go. I mean, like one of the things there is that, our work then, when it's exciting to read, or we find places to, for it to be heard, that's when change happens. Yeah. But let me just read you. This is an example of really good autoethnographic writing. Richard, by the way, was a soldier in the Falklands War, which was in the 80s. Some of us felt that was a deeply illegal war, but there you go. And it's called Hands and a Grenade. It is halfway through the Falklands War in springtime 1982. It is cold. It is dark. I am very tired. As I walk back to my lines, I pass a forward medical aid post. The internal light slashes across the pitch black between us and blinds me. I stop dead as it falls on me. The armed guard recognises me. "Sarge, hold up! Have you got any of those spare grenade pins with you?" I feel inside my windproof smock's pockets among the Boyle sweets and pens and pull out 2 or 3. "Yeah, why?" "MO needs you inside at the double." I run into the tent and halt in shock. Facing me, under fizzing, glaring white lights, is a medical team with a body on a gurney between them. The blood-spattered tall man on the left has a silver thing in his hand and his wrist deep inside a young man's chest, holding the edges of the wound open with his silver retractor. "Felix?" I nod at the doctor. He looks instantly relieved. "Get over here. This patient was shot in the back as he was about to throw a WP grenade, and he rammed it into the hole. Problem is, he's only able to hold the lever down because I am too." "Shit, sir. White phosphorus, also known as WP, is horrible. If it goes off, sticky lumps of phosphorus will eject across a space about 20 meters in diameter and as high. The phosphorus would then react with the oxygen in the air and would burst into almost uncontrollable, piercing, destructive flame and burn deep into any soft surface, like the doctors' and nurses' bodies. I look into the brightly lit chest cavity and see the grenade with its distinctive shape and colours. I also see the doctor's long, thin fingers slippery with blood as they wrap tightly around the young man's hand, holding those younger fingers around the grenade. Near the hand, I see the edge of a young heart, beating rapidly, pumping blood around this dying body. Shit, indeed. "Don't move, boss." I reach forward with my naked, dry left hand and take up the pressure from him. Now, gently slip out of there and clear the tent, fast. I look at the deep brown eyes of the patient, dopey with morphine. The letter M is on his forehead, and tears are running down his chubby child cheeks. His lip and thin are too young to grow bristle. He's just a baby. So what the fuck is he doing here? I keep my left hand around the grenade and reach for one of the pins in my jacket pocket with the other. I smile at him and nod gently. "You're not alone. I'm here with you, son," my eyes say as my right hand moves into the chest cavity next to my left. I glance down and see the grenade needs twisting slightly to the left to expose the pinholes. I rotate my left hand and his fingers come off the body of the bomb with a juicy splashing plop. I now have the fly-off levers safely under my control. I gently line up the pin with the holes, and the blood is getting deeper in there, seeping from somewhere faster and faster. I have to be quicker or the grenade will be hidden under the blood. I automatically check my breathing and heart rate, both calm and normal, as usual during the job. I carefully twist and pull and line up the holes and the tips of the split pin. I gently push and twist it through and caress the ends apart with my fingertips. This secures the fly-off lever and renders the grenade as dangerous as a tin of beans. I smile at the young, very young baby young man and sink into his great big brown doe eyes, pleading at me from behind the drugs and pain, and fear not to be left alone, to be left to die alone. I look and can't look away. I lift the grenade out of his arm, out, and his arm drops down the side of the gurney to dangle, dripping blood on the muddy floor. There's a slopping, sucking sound as the bomb comes free. The boy's wet, damaged flesh holding on to its tiny tin plate friend until the last. I am suddenly hyper-aware. The smell of blood and chemicals and piss and shit and vomit coming off the boy on the gurney. The sounds of people milling about outside. The feel of warm blood thickly squirting up my left forearm. The dampness inside my boots. The raw taste of blood in my mouth. The feel of the filth and grime on my skin. The toughness and roughness of my shirt. The throbbing ache inside my head. The hunger in my centre, not for food, but for someone, anyone, to tell me everything would be all right, that this brown-eyed, olive-skinned baby boy would be all right, that I would be all right. It all rushes me at once and I feel sick. The taste of bile sharply stinging at the back of my throat. I need a drink. I lift the grenade clear and show it to him. I am so deep in his eyes now, and his life leaves his body. There's no shuddering or gasping or shaking. He just leaves me. 1 second he's looking at me, and the next he isn't. But nothing else changes. I just know he is gone. He isn't my first dead body, nor even my third, but his troubles me. The trouble is hiding deep in his eyes. I am still emotionally locked inside them, fascinated, staring at the sudden blankness, emptiness so different from the drug-filled, pain-filled, worry-filled, fearful eyes of a second before. Was it that long ago? I am in there and he is not, and I realize with a tide of guilt that I should have left the bomb there, that I have just murdered him. I place the grenade onto the medical tray and wipe my hands on the sheet beneath him, then turn and walk out into the cold, windy, muddy, noisy dark among the medics and marines and squaddies. I nod at them and close the tent flap, and then melt myself into the surrounding gloom, making my escape quickly and quietly. Looking back, I can see the silhouetted guard looking for me, but I walk on. I do not cry. I do not grieve for him. I do not talk about it again for 25 years. When you hear that, you get the sense of a real description, of somebody's experience. When you talk about post-traumatic stress, what Richard does is just present a story. There's a little bit more which I can go into it. But that last sentence is really kind of quite something, isn't it? After that immense experience, I don't cry, I don't grieve for him, I don't talk about it again for 25 years. There's such a lot in that experience that describes about the onset of an event that creates post-traumatic stress. He says a little bit more about something that happens later. Let's go with that. He muses later, again this is part of his work. And I'll just read you the event actually. Another aspect of this journey into madness is the moment a world crumbles and leaves me high and dry, alone in the madness of the moment, a prey to the past and all the bottled up, battened down emotions of a lifetime of abuse. Most people associate PTSD with battle-scarred soldiers, but any overwhelming life experience can trigger PTSD, especially if the event feels unpredictable and uncontrollable. The next story describes just such a moment when the car I was driving to work one uneventful morning came into an unavoidable high-speed collision with a truck coming the other way. It was the end of one state of mind and the beginning of a far darker time, one that showed it still had the power to terrorize me years later, when, in 2010, I was witness to a road traffic collision that left me shaking. I had been travelling along behind a white panel van at about 50 miles an hour, when this van seemed to silently detonate in front of me. Small bits of van, a lot of dust, and naked bodies were strewn across the road. Before I could stop, I had rolled over, one which reared up and looked at me through my side window. What I had initially seen as an explosion, I soon realised, was the result of an articulated lorry ripping out the side of the van with the sharp corner of its trailer, and the naked bodies were pigs' carcasses being taken to market. These reflections only came later, after I had panicked and fled the scene in a cold sweat and shaking, the victim of my post-traumatic stress disorder now reinforced. What Richard does in his work, he intersperses it obviously with a lot of academic writing, but his work is a really good example of, really allowing us to understand what it's like to experience post-traumatic stress and its origins. Can you get a sense of that? We get a much better understanding of PTSD through this research work, through this autoethnographic work, probably much more than any research that tells us how many victims, come out of, or how many war veterans are victims of post-traumatic stress and the different kind of occasions for that stress. When we hear it from the experience, we really get close to the phenomena. And I can see when I read that story that it has impact. It's a very powerful story. I should have given you a little bit of a kind of a censorship thing before it, to say what I'm about to say contains some very moving material. But that's a really good example of autoethnographic research. Can you see that? Yeah. People will often say, yes, but that's not valid research, is it? From this perspective, from this qualitative research, it is very good research. There are criticisms. People will say, yes, but it's just someone's opinion, someone's story. Yes, it is someone's story, who begins to capture the phenomena, and then, academically will bring in some of the kind of other research or theory that will kind of illustrate it. Yeah, because what Richard does there is in that story, I don't know how you responded to it, but he describes that moment when he goes into shock with the boy. He just talks about it. And do you remember there's a moment when he suddenly becomes aware, which happens to a lot of people who have a trauma. Suddenly there's a moment when you just feel everything. Do you remember he talks about the smell? He suddenly gets the smell, the this, the this. In that moment, all his senses are alert. Yeah. And then he goes into that kind of shutdown, yeah, as he walks away, yeah. And at that point, that's when it's, when he goes into some kind of traumatic dissociation. Yeah. And as he says, he doesn't talk about it for another 25 years.
That is so powerful.
Yeah, yeah. And and what he describes around when he gets triggered, with that event when he's driving his car and there's that accident with a lorry, that's carrying meat. And in that moment, what he experiences in that moment is a powerful flashback. He's seeing bodies everywhere, when in fact they're pigs' carcasses. Yeah. But he's so shocked he walks away. And he's grabbed in a moment. Now that just describes it perfectly, doesn't it? But we hear stories like this all the time. This is our job, isn't it? This is why, therapists have the potential to be such good researchers.
If they were pig carcasses, does that make it any lighter than it being human carcasses?
Well, no, but I think the thing is that the accident triggers for him. That's yeah.
But then pig carcasses are also dead animals.
Yeah. Well, I saw the distress. I don't know if you saw it. Tahir posted on Facebook. It's a deeply moving image. Did you ever seen it of the young boy? It's round about the time when the goats are slaughtered.
Yes.
Oh, the distress of the boy. Yes, who is pleading with his father. He's kind of reaching out to his pet goat. What's his pet goat? But I think don't kill him. I mean, for me, that would be a captured moment. Of like the distress.
This is exactly what I feel each time this happens.
Yeah.
The story that you're sharing right now and the way the PTSD is explained in it, it's so amazing. Even for me sitting here, if you remember, I think yesterday or something, I was talking to you about one of my clients who was a rape victim, but that trauma triggered her childhood trauma, which was probably that trauma was so great. And she keeps asking me this question, why am I remembering that now? Why? And she keeps questioning this. And this makes so much sense in this kind of research sitting there, not with this intellectual academic jargon and this experience. We can have a sense of our client's experience.
And just kind of leading off to that, I think even when Anita and I are teaching a class, it's kind of like, sure, impart the theory, but there is this focus on experiential learning and the importance of experiential learning when you're training to be a therapist. And I feel like for me, that's incredible because it's not just about the head, it's about experiencing it. Like I was sitting here and there was all I could feel things in my body that, go on.
Yeah. No, keep going. No, I'm just speaking. I could feel things in my body. That is such an important aspect, isn't it? That we speak to the whole person, or we speak from all our places. And another important research methodology, it's one that I particularly feel engaged with, is what we call embodied research. I'm going to give you handouts on this. And with embodied research, again, this is all part of the phenomenological models of research. In the phenomenological model, we're trying to get as close as we can to the essence, to the phenomena. But embodied research really places a lot of importance on listening to the body. What Richard does in his writing, his is very embodied, and you hear it in your body. And so in embodied research, we think very carefully about how we communicate from there, from the experience, yeah. And we think about that also in terms of how we write about it, yeah. Like a lot of academic research gets written from a very cold academic perspective, yeah. In embodied research, who was it that mentioned poetry?
Eastern,
With that kind of Eastern model where we value poetics, you know, because the poetry says it so much more than cold words. So poetry can also be utilised in embodied research if it captures the experience. And again, we can, we'll be looking at examples of that.